We should be going. Welcome everyone to the annual Brookline Senior Center and Brookline Community Aging Network Candidates Forum. My name is Michael Allen. I'm a social worker at the Senior Center, and I'll be the moderator. This year, 3 candidates are running for 2 seats on Brookline's Select Board. The election will be held on Tuesday, June 9th. Voters can request an absentee ballot by sending a letter to the town clerk and signing it by hand. Polling places will also be open. We're joined today by all 3 candidates, Heather Hamilton, Eric Hyatt, and John Van Scoik. Thank you to each of you for taking the time to be here. Thank you also to Matt Weiss, who's joining us as a Brookline CAN representative and will be keeping time. Candidates will have 3 minutes to make opening statements and then 1 minute to respond to each question. The order of the response was set randomly and will rotate. Questions have been publicly solicited over the last few weeks, and I've adapted them to try to hit as many major issues as possible. When we begin, Matt will kick things off with 2 questions of particular significance to older adults. Before we begin, I think it's always important to note that Brookline's a diverse community in a variety of ways. This forum doesn't perfectly represent the makeup of that community, and that's important for us to acknowledge at the outset. And also a couple other thank yous to Frank Caro, the co-chair of Brookline CAN, to Ruth Ann Dobeck, the co-chair of Brookline CAN and director of the Council on Aging. Thank you to the Brookline Interactive Group and Ann Tice in particular, who've helped make this online forum work and who are recording and streaming the event live. And Matt, would you like to say a few words about Brookline CAN?
First thing we learned is about unmuting.
There we go.
Brookline CAN is an all-volunteer organization, and we're hosting the forum. It's a network of older adults working on issues for residents of all ages of Brookline. And some of the things that we deal with are education, advocacy, discussions, as you can see here, but discussions we have of all types, networking amongst us and the other organizations in town, and many of the both semi and government and semi-government and nonprofit groups. And we work with forums on all issues, including elections. If you want to look further into what we have, and including this show, you can check out the website at brooklinecan.org, and you'll see both this and a whole host of other information related to the organization. And you can join, because that's the opportunity to become a member. Thank you, Michael.
All right, thank you, Matt. So let's get started with opening statements. And so we'll get started with you, Eric.
Hi, thank you very, very much to Brookline CAN for hosting this incredible forum. And thanks to my town meeting member, Frank Caro. I'm really honored to be a constituent in Precinct 10, and Frank's amazing work to the town has been an inspiration to me and partially informed my decision to run. A little bit about my background. I grew up here in Brookline. I grew up on Mason Terrace. I attended Driscoll School, Driscoll class of 1980 and BHS class of 1987. I was also in school within a school at Brookline High. I went on to Harvard and MIT and to a career in international business development. My expertise is in contract negotiation. I worked for Microsoft, for Deutsche Bank, at OBrien, negotiating billion-dollar contracts. So I have some pretty good skills around finances. I moved back to Brookline in 2008, and I actually stayed with my mom for the first 18 months when I came back. And since then, the past 12 years, I've been running my own business, helping small Japanese companies enter the US market, and I'm a professional Japanese translator. That is to say that I care a lot about all the different communities in Brookline. For the past 4 weeks or so, I have been trying to push the Town of Brookline Select Board to do even more to support access to voting, because voting in this election is really complicated. As Michael said at the beginning of the session, you can request an early voting ballot. The process requires that you request the ballot, then you mail in your request, then the ballot gets mailed to you, then you sign the ballot, then you mail it back in. So I have been helping in the past couple weeks through the network Mutual Aid Brookline, and also on my own to try to get seniors registered. It's registered and to receive their early voting ballots. We'll talk about it a little bit more in this conversation, but I watched my mom get pushed out of Brookline as her home became less and less affordable to her. And as an older resident on a fixed income, it became more and more difficult for her to survive here. And eventually she just couldn't afford to stay in Brookline. That was heartbreaking to me. And what was worse was that when my mom then tried to get some support from the town to say, hey, is there an apartment available? Something moderately priced for a senior. They said, sure, no problem. It's just a 5-year wait and you can have one. And, that was not realistic or attainable for my mother to wait like that. So I really, really do care about the quality of life for the seniors we have in Brookline. My proposals we'll hear a little bit about today are to welcome a lot more seniors to Brookline by building a lot more housing designated for seniors. Because of the work that Frank, Carol, and others have done, Brookline's really livable for seniors. I finally want to just say this, this COVID pandemic has come down especially hard on seniors. I can't hug my own mom. She lives in a facility for Alzheimer's care. I can't give her a hug. It'll be a long time. It's made me realize that there's a punishing isolation for senior citizens. And I just want to let you know that I really do care about this issue. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. And now we'll send it over to John.
Yes, thank you very much for sponsoring this forum. I do hope that one way or another, a lot of senior citizens get to experience this forum. And one reason is because I'm a senior myself, and I'm proudly 71 years old, going on 72 in August. I identify very much with senior citizens, not only on issues, but on what it's like to be a senior citizen. And for that reason, I'm just going to share a short story, promise not to go on too long, about what happened when I decided that I was going to run for select board. And before I made the announcement, I spoke to a few people from around town, and one of them said to me, I don't think you should do it. And I said, why not? And they said, because your generation has had its turn, and it's time for others to have their turn. And I thought about what they had said, and I think I understand where that person was coming from. But on the other hand, I have to point out a couple of things. First of all, labeling all senior citizens, assuming that we would all sort of agree with that statement, that doesn't recognize the diversity of senior citizens. There are some who would say, yeah, I'm content to just kind of step aside, sit on the beach, enjoy retirement. But there are other senior citizens who want to have a very different time of life. They want to be very active. They want to be involved. They feel that they've still got something to contribute. So that's the first thing that's wrong, is assuming that we're all the same. The second thing that's wrong is assuming that we don't have something to contribute. Senior citizens got that way by experiencing a lot of life, and by also experiencing a lot of the struggles and the problems that need to be dealt with in life. And some of us very much have a lot to contribute, both in terms of experience and knowledge. And in fact, that's kind of the calling card of my campaign. I've been a town meeting member for some 30 years. And I have been on the record with votes during all of those 30 years. During that same time, I've been on the advisory committee twice, which has given me 2 times to experience the challenges of figuring out how to balance the needs of Brookline in a budget. One of those times I was elected chair. I think that tells you something about my leadership abilities. So please don't write off seniors just because we're seniors. And I hope that I've proven that seniors still have a lot to contribute and need to be part of Brookline's future. Thank you.
Thanks very much, John. And now we'll go over to Heather.
Thank you so much for having me. my name is Heather Hamilton, and I am running for re-election to the Select Board. I'm a project manager in the transportation practice at BSC Group, a civil engineering firm in Boston. Previously, I worked at the Massachusetts Department of Transportation for 7 years. I have a master's in transportation policy and another master's in public administration. I choose to live in Brookline for a number of reasons. It is incredibly walkable. It is charmingly historic. There are great community activism and engagement by its residents, and the businesses are some of my favorite places to frequent. I'm committed to sustainability, fiscal responsibility, quality public education, and making Brookline affordable for all, especially seniors. Over the past 3 years, I've demonstrated these values in a number of initiatives. I've co-sponsored numerous warrant articles that help to address our response to climate change. I have organized and led innovative transportation pilots. I co-chaired the campaign for Driscoll, and I'm leading a committee to build more senior affordable housing in Brookline Village. Over the next 3 years, I would like to finish the work I started on the Land Bank Study Committee that will recommend we put the Community Preservation Act back before the voters in order to raise funds for open space, preservation, and affordable housing. I want to experiment with new transportation pilots that put moving people first, not single occupant vehicles. I would like to continue to help recruit more diverse points of view for boards and commissions, and especially town meeting, who ultimately decide many of our community's values and where we allocate our precious dollars. We are in the midst of a real budget crisis. The town took the action to furlough some employees to balance the budget for fiscal year 20, but severe cuts are looming for fiscal years 21 and 22. We do not yet know by how much our revenues will decrease and when life will return to normal, if ever. I am committed to making this process as transparent, as collegial, and as equitable as possible. I'm asking for your vote this townwide election season. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Heather. So now we're going to have a couple of questions of particular interest to older adults in town. And as our Brookline CAN representative, Matt's going to be the one to pose those questions. You're muted, Matt.
I'm glad I don't have to answer them, is what I said. Okay, the first question is a relatively long one, so I'll read it and then any other questions you have, that's fine. Around a third of Brookline's roughly 5,900 older adult households are renters. 50% of those households are housing cost burdened, which means that they spend more than 30% of their income for housing, as opposed to 30% of older adults overall in town who are cost burdened. The town has a committee looking at alleviating tax burdens of our senior homeowner residents, but renters remain vulnerable. What do you propose to do to help older rents who are disproportionately housing cost burdened?
All right, thanks, Matt. To you first, John.
Yes, thank you again, and thank you for the question. I think the distinction between renters and homeowners is important, but I also want to just make a quick point here. Sometimes proposals that are well-intentioned and aimed at renters end up hurting elderly homeowners. And that's why we have to be very careful to balance. And that's one of the considerations that we need to include when we look at the proposals for a real estate transfer tax, because of a lot of the people who would be impacted by that are senior citizens living in their homes. Now on to renters. I think that we have a clear answer to how to create more affordable housing for seniors, and that's to do more projects like the Two Life Communities project, which is going up right now on Harvard Street. And I was at the groundbreaking ceremonies for that project, and it's amazing the broad range of Brookline talent that came together to make that happen. And a couple of officials from the state were there, and they said, Brookline is a model for how to do projects like this. And so Amy Scheckman, who was one of the key people, she can show us the way. Donna Calico, one of the key people, she can show us the way. Roger Blood, one of the key people, Congressman Kennedy. So let's learn from that project, and let's just try as best we can to find more opportunities to do projects like the Two Life Communities project on Harvard Street.
Thanks, John, and over to you, Heather.
Thank you. I will try to address this in two parts. I am currently working on a proposal that would select a developer for the Kent Street municipal lot that is between Kent and Station Street, right next to Brookline Village T-Stop. That has been ongoing for a number of years. I believe I was a town meeting member when the warrant article came before us. So it was over 3 years ago. And we've worked through a committee to alleviate the concerns of the nearby abutters. And I think we hope to have something before town meeting that would envision something between 45 and 60 units of hopefully 100% senior affordable housing, which I'm really excited about and is desperately needed. And if we can do it at that spot, we have, I think, 8 other municipal owned lots that we could think about recreating that model. My next point is we do a number of programs for owners and especially senior owners. And one of actually the biggest impacts I have on the board, much to my surprise, is when we set the residential exemption. Just the decision alone between 20% or 22% can have enormous impacts on renters and condo owners or single family homeowners. We really need to look at the way our policies have traditionally been looked at in the past and see how many people are we serving when we set those residential exemptions, and are they serving today's people who decide to live in Brookline? And then the other thing that I just want to bring up shortly is I do think that this is a supply issue. I think that more housing is needed. People are being priced out because there is always someone else who is willing to pay more and more of their salary to be able to afford Brookline. And until we start to see some more housing stock that is transit accessible, it doesn't make sense in all of Brookline. But for key transit corridors, I think we absolutely owe it to everyone who wants to live here to look at current zoning laws.
Thanks, Heather. And I think we're having a little issue with timekeeping. So John and Eric, I'll try to give you a little more buffer on a future question. So over to you, Eric. Thanks.
Thanks. Okay. Well, I'm proud to be a renter in mine, and to me, the cost of rentals in Brookline is what drove me out of Brookline. So I mentioned that my mom got pushed out, but I too also got pushed out for 3 years due to inability to find an affordable place to rent in Brookline. So I definitely identify with those in that category. I live with my boyfriend. I should have mentioned that. If elected, I'll be the first openly gay select board member in Brookline. And he and I care quite a lot about this issue, about how to alleviate the burdens of renting. The one answer is definitely the fact that a lot of our senior citizens are our most eco-friendly residents, in that they don't necessarily require a car, that is one way to reduce costs, is to be able to build housing that is awesome for seniors, that does not require the same parking minimums. That would enable us to build a ton more housing in really great areas. And I have a bold redevelopment plan for Coolidge Corner, which would include mixed use development. So there'd be a floor of retail and 1 to 2 floors of housing above. Nothing crazy, not trying to make a looming streetscape, but something at a livable scale that would build up to thousands more units for seniors to rent. I think that renting is cheap, but it has to be done in a way that takes stock of the fiscal realities and the reality that parking is what drives up the cost of housing. So eco-friendly seniors who are willing to live here without parking would be the core of my plan. It's a progressive plan to really add a lot to Brookline in terms of housing stock.
All right, thank you, Eric. So we'll go to Matt for our second question of particular interest to older adults.
This one I'm very concerned about myself. Brookline CAN's well involved with the senior center. We work there and we meet there. We work with them and with the Council on Aging. So the question is, do you favor the use of capital improvement program funds to plan for expanded programming space for the Council on Aging?
Thanks, Matt. And first to you, Heather.
But I will keep the timing to 1 minute if possible at this point.
Okay. I will try to keep an eye on your window. Of course, I favor using CIP funding, but I don't know whether or not we will actually have that ability, at least this year. With the town administrator and the superintendent citing, multiple millions in shortfall, this year I don't see that as realistic. But I absolutely think that we need to expand programs and services, and whether or not we get the private sector involved. I know shuttle service is something that is always talked about because we want seniors to feel comfortable not only navigating our streets on foot, but to be able to give up their car and have an alternative. So I would definitely fight for especially more transportation related options. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Heather. Over to you, Eric.
Well, in good times, of course, I would support that. And I mean, in principle, I think it's crucial that we have more space, or a second senior center, or whatever we'd like to say. But in the interim, we're in the middle of a global pandemic of unspecified duration, whose impact has disproportionately fallen on senior citizens. So I would immediately suggest that the focus should be on doing something to systematically track the well-being of senior citizens in our community. I would spend the money there. Honestly, I think that expanded space sounds great, but I'm worried about right now and for the next year or year and a half. People who are in a higher risk category have to wait for that vaccine or for herd immunity to develop. So I would rather we do outreach. I'd take advantage of the stranded college students we have in Brookline right now, use the mutual aid Brookline or other residence-based networks, and try to do something to build something kind of a network to track senior citizens in our community. I think that's got to be the first priority. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Eric. And to you, John.
Yes, thanks for the question. And I'll point out a couple of things. On the advisory committee, I became aware of a problem that has been chronic for the senior center. And that is they've been asking year after year for an additional person to do janitorial services. And there just hasn't been the money in the budget for it. And when you realize that we have to make decisions like that right now, it does give me pause that we might not be ready to add money to the capital budget for more space there. It's sad that we have to make those decisions, but we do. I want to offer, however, a proposal here, which is, as we all know, there is before us the possibility that there's going to be an additional 40 units of BHA housing at the Colonel Floyd complex. The head of the BHA calls it the opportunity of a lifetime. Maybe it's the opportunity of a lifetime to add some space along the lines of the proposal in the question. I'd like to at least put that out there for people to consider.
Well, thanks very much, John. And thank you to Matt for bringing those questions. So our next question is that Brookline has faced significant budget problems even before the current pandemic, and now faces an additional significant decline in tax revenue. So how can Brookline strive to meet these financial challenges without hurting those who cannot afford to pay more in taxes? And over to you, Eric.
Thank you. I would start by capping the property tax for low-income individuals. The two ways we can do this, and I mean, I don't have the exact answer as to which of these two methods will be best. It will be a discussion. But one way is to obviously raise the residential exemption. And the other way would be to apply a means test, so that if, let's say that you live in like a $3 million home, but you're on a fixed income. Well, that home isn't really able to generate any revenue for you. So, can we find a way for you to stay in your home, but pay less tax during your lifetime? So for me, this is about getting creative with our tax scheme and how we look at property taxes. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. To you, John.
One of the proposals that Brookline is going to face within the next year is to adopt the Community Preservation Act, which would add a small incremental amount to our taxes each year to be used for preservation, open space, and one other purpose. I'm sorry, I've forgotten it. But that I think is worth looking at because it's incremental, it's small, and if we can make sure that the purposes are right, I would consider that as a possibility. We're going to need to do something in the year ahead to cover what is going to be a shortfall in revenues that's going to continue beyond this year and into the next. But whatever we do, we've got to make sure that the impact on the most vulnerable of our citizens is the least, and that those at the top of the income brackets and the top of the wealth brackets are the ones that share.
Thanks very much, John, and over to you, Heather.
This is a really tough question that it's going to take, I think, all stakeholders, all townwide elected people to really try to figure out, because there is no easy answer. I am very favorable towards new growth, increasing the pie so that we're not going back to the same 70% of the pie, which are really only the homeowners in town that we usually go to when we need extra money. We've had a number of overrides, and I think we are nearing override fatigue. That being said, I will probably recommend, the CPA, which, as John said, is modest, but it has 4 key purposes, including affordable housing, and it requires at least 10% be used towards each of the purposes. I assume we would definitely do more than 10% of it towards affordable housing. But we need to get very creative on how we address vulnerable populations that are not necessarily represented. Thank you.
Thanks, Heather. And moving on to the next question, right in line with some of the themes that have already come up, how do you think Brookline should manage the ongoing demand for more housing, and in particular, the demand for more affordable housing? And going over to you first, John.
Yes. Well, let me say what I think we shouldn't do first. We shouldn't approach this by identifying single-family neighborhoods as being the source of the affordable housing problem. There are robust, beloved single-family neighborhoods all over Brookline, and they are single-family neighborhoods because the zoning makes it possible for them to be single-family neighborhoods. And there are proposals on the table right now to essentially eliminate that zoning. So we shouldn't do it that way. What we should do is targeted, opportunistic examination of our commercial corridors and look for the maximum opportunities to develop both housing and to do commercial development in those corridors, because we need both. You cannot do the housing without doing the commercial development. Otherwise, you won't be able to sustain all of the services, including education, that come along with the housing.
Thanks very much, John. Heather.
I agree a lot with what John said. I think that FAR is kind of an archaic throwback to a different time of a way of life, that we tastes and preferences have changed. One of the things that motivated me to get elected to town meeting was having a conversation with another town meeting member who said, do you realize that there's a 2-spot minimum for each new 1-bedroom and studio apartment in town? And I thought he was joking. So I think that we have had a history of trying to prevent development, and it definitely needs to be mixed use. It definitely needs to right size the ship, be the equilibrium between commercial tax base and residential. But I am not against height or density. That's just my preference, and I think I'm not the only one. Thank you.
Thanks, Heather. Over to you, Eric.
Yes, actually, Heather and I were both endorsed by an organization called Brookline for Everyone. And this organization strongly supports the building of more housing, more affordable housing. We want to build 3,300 roughly new units of housing in Brookline. Now, by comparison, over the past decade, Brookline has added only 239 new housing units to our stock. So this is a very much increase. And as far as I'm concerned, seniors could be the bulk of the new residents. Why? Because we're set up well for seniors. We have wonderful services, it's walkable, and seniors are eco-friendly and don't necessarily need cars. I think they're a wonderful addition to the town. We should have a lot more of them. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Eric. And so moving to the next question. How can Brookline adequately fund its schools, both in terms of building and operation costs, while doing justice to other town services? And first over to you, Heather.
So in 60 seconds, I get to summarize the town school partnership and also say how to address a $12 million a hole in the budget. Okay, where do I start? I mean, a lot of things are state mandated. That being said, we get a number of state aid in the form of, I think, primarily Chapter 70. I'm not as familiar with the school side of the budget as I am with the municipal side. It's incredibly complicated. We the municipal side owns all of the buildings, and we have to maintain them because we have to provide a certain level of service for public education. It has eroded the municipal budget over the years, and that's why you've seen a couple of operational overrides that have tried to, pour money back into municipal services. It's very difficult to try to make the case for more municipal revenues when nobody wants to see their taxes go up. Thank you.
And I take your point that it's also difficult to answer that question in 60 seconds. So thank you for trying. And Eric, to you.
Thanks. We're in the middle of a national disaster, a global disaster right now. As a Brookline Public Schools alum, I feel really strongly about this topic. I did a kind of a lengthy post this morning on the Public Schools of Brookline Facebook page. Bottom line is, as a select board member, I would go to the mat for every federal and state dollar available of disaster relief. We need to think of this as a disaster we're having right now. It's not a budget shortfall, it's a disaster, an emergency, which means that the federal government needs to step up and provide aid to municipalities like Brookline. The state government needs to step up and provide aid. These are school children we're talking about. Like, we can't let their needs go unmet. That's unacceptable. So we need to get some help in here. The only thing that the select board can do, the most important thing, is to advocate and demand that we get every penny of aid that we possibly can, as creatively as we can and as quickly as we can, to protect the schools. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. John.
To be honest, I don't have the answer yet as to where the money is going to come from. We do have options, and in only a minute, I can't go into all of them, but we do have some options. What I do know is there are actually areas where we're going to have to spend more on the schools. And to take some examples, return to school. There's going to have to be all kinds of adjustments made because of COVID-19. We're going to have money for sanitizing. We're going to have money to accommodate the reality that students cannot sit as close together as before. We're going to have additional funds for mental health services for the kids who come back to school damaged because of what they've experienced during this COVID-19 crisis. So let's all agree, and I think we do, frankly, that we start with what are the essentials that we're going to have to invest more money in as a result of COVID-19. And then let's work our way towards where we're going to find that money. But we can't disagree on these essentials.
All right, thanks very much. So the next question is, it's a two-part question, and we're doing well on time. So let's do 2 minutes each for this question since there's two parts. Part one is, should town meeting approve the zoning changes sought by Welltower to build a senior residential development on Fisher Hill? And if the town does approve the changes, this is part two, which option for meeting the affordable housing requirements do you favor, Holland Street or the Colonel Floyd Apartments? And starting with you, Eric.
Yes, town meeting should approve the zoning changes for the Welltower, so-called East Parcel, where the senior living community would be built. I have friends, close friends, living in some of these similar communities, Brookhaven at Lexington and LaSalle Village in Newton. The types of senior citizens that live in these communities are the most active, engaged, enthusiastic seniors. They're seeking a whole lifestyle of engagement, lifetime learning, things like that. It's not just housing, okay? If people want a nice apartment, there's places to get one. These communities are amazing. So yes, I fully support welcoming 120 new units of senior housing and 40 units of memory care housing. My mom lives in a memory care facility. I understand what that's about. In terms of the housing, I have gone back and forth, but at this point, I have to join the consensus that's building in town to support the Colonel Floyd project. I think we get more bang for our buck by pulling the money from the Welltower developers with existing funding. So we'll end up with, I mean, it sounds like 100 units, which is, I mean, we already have 60, and it uses up 30 Section 8 waivers. So I don't want to like overstate it, but we get a lot more bang for our buck. Plus the Colonel Floyd apartments are one stairway up. My mom wouldn't have been comfortable walking up a flight of stairs to get into her apartment. I don't think any senior citizen should have to do. So in this particular case, I'm in favor of that. It does not mean I don't support workforce housing in Brookline. On the contrary, I do. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. To you, John.
All right, this is an interesting question because there's some history to it. Yes, I absolutely support the zoning. I absolutely support the option to expand the Colonel Floyd with an additional 40 units and to renovate the very badly in need of renovation 60 units. And I note that the head of the BHA called this the opportunity of a lifetime. I also note that the Senior Council Board of Directors has voted to support the BHA option. So I think we've pretty much formed consensus on that. And now we need to get it through town meeting and go ahead with it. But I want to give you just a little history on why do we have this option before us, this opportunity of a lifetime. It all started just over a year ago when there was a December town meeting, and the day after the town meeting ended, we discovered that the Newbury property had come on the market. And some town meeting members mobilized immediately. Regina Frawley prominently led the effort. Others joined in. Others formed a group that met regularly and strategized. How do we get town meeting? How do we get the select board to recognize this Newbury opportunity? I was part of that group. I was very proudly part of that group. By the time we went back to town meeting with our resolution, it passed unanimously, and that got the ball rolling. A committee was formed with some really talented people on it, former select board chair Neil Wyshynski among them. They did the hard work of getting into the negotiation for the property, which resulted in Welltower buying it, and now Welltower offering to sell half of it back to the town, and now Welltower agreeing to put $6 million into housing. These things don't just happen, and it's experienced people who make them happen, and that's why I am running for select board.
All right, thanks, John, and over to you, Heather.
Yes. So the first part of the question is, do I support the warrant articles associated with, I guess, the zoning relief of the parcel for Welltower? And I would say yes. As a select board member, I understand that I think it's about $1 million in revenue generated a year. I think that those are the numbers that I have seen. And we need that right now. The other part of the question is whether I support the Holland Road affordable housing option or the Colonel Floyd. I voted, I believe, in the majority opinion for the select board to recommend to town meeting that we go with the Colonel Floyd apartments. Now, it's an easy decision to me. However, I will acknowledge that it is more complicated. By putting all affordable housing in one area of town, we are segregating low-income people. And I do have moral qualms about that, but the transportation person in me says we need as many units as we can get, and that's what this is the value, and it's closer to transit. So those are the trade-offs, but I tried to keep both the pros and the cons in mind and make a choice that I was able to look myself in the mirror with.
Thanks very much, Heather. Moving to our next question. Brookline has had difficulty in solving complex problems like finding a location for a new elementary school. Is it time for Brookline to look into adopting a city form of government that would include a mayor with a mandate to provide strong leadership? And to you first, John.
I love this question because it forces us all to think about not only the opportunities of a city form of government, but also the history and the traditions of our town meeting form of government. And I'm one of those who really wants to have that discussion and that debate. I want this question to be on the ballot. I want voters to have a say in it and to think through it with us. And I'm on the fence. I'll admit I'm on the fence. Having been a town meeting member for 30 years, it's going to be very hard for me to not sort of let people in on one of Brookline's best kept secrets, which is town meeting's very special. I had an experience at a party recently where someone came to me and said, we got to have a city form of government. And I said, how long have you been in town? He said, about a year. I said, and you're running for town meeting, aren't you? And he said, yeah. And I said, could you do that in a city? So that's the kind of question we have to think about. I think it's time to address them. And I want to be part of that discussion. And I'll make up my mind when I hear from everybody on both sides. Or probably in this being Brookline, there'll be more than two sides to that question.
Thanks, John. To you, Heather.
It's complicated, like so many things. It's not as straightforward as if we vote to be a city, automatically we get a mayor and 9 city councilors. We actually have a lot of discretion as to what a new charter would look like. That being said, I too find myself on the fence, although I am kind of leaning one way now, being on the select board and realizing the enormity, the gravity, the complex issues, all while I'm a volunteer. I'm in town hall bare minimum 1 time a week for the select board meeting, usually 2 or 3 times a week. It's very late. I have a dedicated email account that people I get lots of emails, and some people think that this is my full-time job and they expect an immediate response, and they think that I sit in town hall and I can walk down the hall and talk to a department head, and that is not the way it works. That being said, I do love town meeting. It is a low barrier.
Are you all set, Heather? Oh, looks like we've got a little freeze. Our first technical difficulty.
Yeah, that was my error with the time.
Okay, well, so we'll send it over to you, Eric. So take it away.
I did say stop suddenly, and she might have hit a button.
No.
No, I'm sorry. It looks like we knocked Heather out of the call temporarily. I hope she'll unfreeze
Yes.
momentarily. So I was interested in what Newton did last year, where they made a change to their city charters. So they were already a city, but they elect some changes, streamlining the city government And I thought that was an interesting potential model for what we could do here in Brookline. The idea of changing our charter has to come from within, and we have to then ask the state for permission, and then it has to come from within again in the form of a vote. So it's not something to be done overnight. I gave a real quick and dirty answer the other day, which is that I would keep it as a town, but I would reduce the size of town meeting to maybe 26 members, 1 per precinct and 10 at large, something like that. Might streamline our decision-making process. I would pay the select board. I certainly would pay the 5 members of the select board a professional salary. I think that's one thing we can do without changing our charter at all, is agree that that is a professional job and should be paid as such. And beyond that, I'm going to go ahead and stop. I've reached my time limit. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. And sorry, Heather, for our technical difficulty there. And thanks for your answer as well. Moving on to the next question. What is the role of the select board in encouraging better coordination of transportation, land use, housing production, and other types of planning? And starting with you, Heather.
Oh my God, I love this idea. I wish we had all the control in the world. No, I don't. If I had my way, yeah, we would have endless capacity for bike walking, a lot of lower speed form of transportation. And sure, let's throw in endless parking too. But that's not the reality that we have. The town has control over the roadway, and the select board doesn't even have full control. The transportation board actually has exclusive jurisdiction on sidewalks and I think parts of the roadway, but definitely the sidewalks. So it's a team sport, and I think that we can advocate. So that's the role of the select board. We could definitely advocate for warrant articles to be sponsored that revisit zoning, so that the private industry can build what we want to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. And to you, Eric.
The select board can lead through vision, and I think that's really important. And the select board also literally sets the agenda for the town each week. So those are 2 ways that the select board can lead these things, by putting those items on the agenda. It's not that I'm accusing the select board of not working with the town agencies that do these things, but the select board can set an agenda. The select board can bring bold ideas. One idea I have is a circulator bus, an electric circulator bus, to try to connect South Brookline, Putterham Circle with Cleveland Circle, Coolidge Corner, Washington Square. I don't think that would be a very expensive proposition, and I think there's federal and state money we can get to do it. So often the select board's job is to have a vision and identify money. If we can do those 2 things, I think our town agencies and offices are pretty good at doing their job. But getting them the money and providing the vision and leadership is what I see as the role of the select board. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. And to you, John.
Well, I just want to point out something, which is that the most direct and immediate impact that the select board can have on bringing together all of the things that were mentioned is through appointments. It's the select board that appoints to these bodies. And I'm thinking about the example of the select board has something called the Climate Advisory Board, and they wouldn't appoint a climate change denier to that board. You know, we need people on that board who get it and who get the future when it comes to climate change. By the same token, on the transportation board, we need people who clearly get it. They get that there has to be a new future where transportation is concerned, sustainable transportation. So let's first go for appointees who fit with the vision. And let's also, as Eric said, let's make sure that everybody knows what the vision of the select board is. And I think they could spend a little bit more time on making clear what the vision is, and a little bit less time on some of the routine business of the board, which seems to consume so many minutes every week.
All right. Well, thank you, John. So we're going to move to the next question. It's going to be our last question before we do closing statements. And the question is, how can Brookline make sidewalks safer for pedestrians? Starting with you, Eric.
Well, the scooter pilot of last year proved to all of us that what we cannot do is have random pieces of equipment strewn about our sidewalks. So that must never happen again. If there's going to be a scooter in Brookline, it will be ridden in the street and parked in the street. Like, I don't ever want to see a scooter on a sidewalk again. That was very upsetting. The benches have helped a lot. They've helped to give people a place to put something down as they're taking a walk. But if we want to make them truly safer, we need to make them wider. And the COVID-19 pandemic has proven that point. I don't have to say a word. We all know what social distancing is now and how much space it really takes. So in some cases, we've had to remove parking spaces and replace that with a wider area. Sidewalks need to be widened for safety. So that means taking space away from other forms of transportation. In particular, I would get rid of on-street parking in certain areas. So we can have a much better streetscape, more of a pedestrian vibe, much cooler, much safer. That's what I'm recommending.
All right, thank you, Eric. Over to you, John.
I'm glad Eric mentioned that we don't ever want to see the scooters on the sidewalks again. I've been saying that at meeting after meeting, and I'll say it again at this forum. And the other thing I want to say is we have seen at least a small slice of the vision of the sustainable future. The future that emphasizes biking and walking over cars. And that's in the ongoing work that has taken place, Coolidge Corner, parts of Harvard Street, Longwood Avenue. That was brought about by COVID-19. We should ask ourselves, how come it took COVID-19 to figure out that might be a more sustainable transportation plan than the one we have now? But that aside, now that we've had the experiment, let's build on the experiment. Let's figure out how we make that permanent and then how we extend that to other parts of town. And that's just the beginning of how we can re-envision transportation for the future in Brookline.
Thanks, John. And over to you, Heather.
So I'm glad scooters came up for two reasons. One, I totally agree that they do not belong on the sidewalk, but I got the best, most constructive feedback during the pilot from those at the senior center. And one of those pieces of constructive feedback was when I said that we were going to do a user survey. One person said, well, I'm not going to be able to take advantage of that because I'm not a user. So we made it a user and a non-user survey, and we got great information from it. We also got data on where people are traveling, and I advocated incredibly strongly. I did not realize it would be as controversial as it was to widen the sidewalks during COVID. I absolutely think that we've proven that there is appetite, and the scooter data actually helped us determine where people were more likely to be going. We had 170,000 trips, and so we had a lot of data. Right now, we don't have the luxury of collecting trip data. So I think my record stands for itself. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Heather, and thank you all for responding to the questions. We're going to move to 2-minute closing statements, and we'll continue the order that we've been cycling through. So, John, you are up first.
Well, thank you again for having this forum. I do hope that large numbers of voters get to see it, and especially large numbers of senior citizens. I began today by identifying with senior citizens, and I want to conclude the same way. I talked about experience and knowledge when I began the presentation, and now that we're at the conclusion, I want to speak about another quality which I think senior citizens can especially identify with. And that's the quality of wisdom. I'm not gonna overdo it and say, boy, am I wise. But I will say I'm wiser than I was when I was a young man. And that does come with time. And one of the things that I include in wisdom is that sometimes it's not the best idea to start out at the top. Sometimes a good idea is to start on the bottom rungs of the ladder, or at least start at an entry level and learn and work your way up. And frankly, that's what I have done. As I say, I've been a town meeting member for 30 years. I learned the ropes on the advisory committee. I've dealt with a lot of issues that were divisive, that were hard to resolve, but they got resolved. We've been through Prop 2.5. We've been through the recession in 2008. Brookline did well to deal with those issues and to come together afterwards. And now we're going to have to do the same thing with COVID-19. We can do it, and wisdom helps. And another quality of wisdom is also to give yourself time. Give yourself time to really sort through an issue. Don't start the process of resolving an issue by saying, here's my idea. Because if everybody who's in the process is yelling, here's my idea, here's my idea, here's my idea, and nobody is listening, you're not going to get anywhere. So take some time first to listen, and don't be afraid to say, I haven't made up my mind yet. I think you heard me say that a couple of times today. I hope people accept that that's part of wisdom, and I hope people accept that I can bring that to the select board and vote for me either on June 9th or by mail.
Thanks, John. Over to you, Heather.
Thank you. I guess to build off of that point of wisdom, the older I get, the more I realize how much I don't know. As you learn more, you realize how expansive the universe is. And I think I actually kind of like that about the select board. The more I serve, the more I become familiar with things I didn't know. Whether, it was because we've done it for a really long time that way, or other towns are doing it this way, or we didn't, predict that things were going to be this way. But I'm always learning. And I love that about the select board. It doesn't always make for an easy 60 or 90-second answer to a question, because the downside is you realize how complicated things are and how much control you have, but most of the time, how much control you do not have. So I just want to say I have really enjoyed these past 3 years. I would really like to continue to serve for the next 3. And I really hope that you'll have me. So please vote for Heather Hamilton, either by mail or on June 9th.
Thanks, Heather. And bring it home, Eric.
Thank you so much to Brookline CAN and Senior Center for hosting this forum. There's a systemic problem in Brookline for seniors of their feeling less and less welcome. And I hear those who are trying to defend the town's record on this, but I think it's indefensible if this is the best we can do. That my mom was pushed out of Brookline due to lack of ability to afford housing after 43 years of giving to this community. That I was pushed out of Brookline for lack of ability to afford housing, and that since coming back, I've done nothing but give back to the town, teaching ESL, standing with seniors, standing with people of color, standing with Asian Americans in the pandemic. No senior should ever have to worry about COVID-19. No senior should ever have to worry about food or affordable housing in Brookline. And no senior should be feeling like they don't have the right to stay here. This is their town. If you live in Brookline, you should be able to stay here. This is a fixable problem. I guess I would describe myself as a pragmatist, but as also kind of a visionary candidate in this race. And I am here to say, yes, we can fix these problems, but they have structural causes in our town. I can't put it any other way except that seniors are feeling less and less welcome. And my goal here is to change that and reverse that narrative. So that would mean bringing in new seniors. It would mean helping renters and homeowners afford to stay. It would mean devising new programs to make sure that we look after their welfare. And most importantly of all, it means that we can vote, that all seniors will be able to vote. This upcoming election is really challenging. The select board hasn't done enough, as far as I'm concerned, to help the town clerk's office make this vote accessible. So if you're a senior citizen, or even if you know a senior citizen, please make sure that you understand this process. You have to mail in an application to receive an early voting ballot, then mail back that early voting ballot. It's a complex procedure. Please make sure that you get informed on this matter. And I know I can count on the Senior Center to help you do it. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Eric, and thank you so much to all of the candidates for joining us. We moved quickly. We covered a lot of territory, and I really appreciate you all taking the time. Thanks so much to Matt for being our timekeeper and representing Brookline CAN. Thank you to Frank and Ruth Ann, the co-chairs of Brookline CAN, and very much also to Big and Antice for making this happen and streaming it online in a couple places. This forum will air on Big repeatedly on the local access cable channel, and also we'll be posting the recording of it on YouTube, on the Brookline CAN website, and probably a couple other places as well. So thank you for joining us, and thank you again to the candidates.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So long.
So long.